Hello everyone, it's Shannon here for Hero Arts. In today's video, we are going to create this fall card that has a Stormy scene with the awesome new September My Monthly Hero kit. This is the Hero Scape included in the September kit. As you can see, it is well loved. I've made a ton of cards with this set because it is just so easy and so fun to create these festive pumpkin patch scenes. I'm going to start with the main image, which is the pumpkin field, and I'm going to start with what I'm calling the detail layer for the leaves because it creates all the little veins in the leaves. And I'm going to ink this up in just black ink. I'm going to use INTENS-ified Black, and I'm going to stamp it on to antique ivory cardstock. So not white cardstock this time. I'm going to use the slightly off-white cardstock. I think it makes it a richer and definitely more of an autumn feeling for the card. I'm now going to move on to the second layer. This is the base for the leaves. So this stamp here will actually color the leaves. And I'm going to ink this up in raspberry jam and then stamp it. And with that stamped, I'm going to move on to the pumpkins. I'm going to start with the base for the pumpkin, so this colors the body of the pumpkins, and I'm going to ink this up first in Tangerine, so really bright orange. Once I stamp it in Tangerine, I'm going to partially ink it up with pale tomato. So I'm holding my little mini ink pad at an angle and just getting the bottoms of some of the pumpkins. Some of them are too small and too tight to kind of get the bottoms, but just a little bit of this pale tomato really adds a lot of depth to these pumpkins. I'll hold it up to the camera so you can see it just adds that little shadow, and I definitely think it's worth that little extra step to do that partial inking. I just think it really adds a lot. So now moving on to the detail layer for the pumpkins, and I'm going to ink this up in strawberry and stamp it, and that will actually complete my pumpkin field. So a really rich kind of deep orange and reds there. I really like how that turned out. I'm now going to move on to the corn field. I'm going to start with the base layer for the cornfield and ink it up first in Dandelion and then stamp it. After I stamp it in Dandelion, I'm going to do some partial inking again. This is pumpkin pie, and I'm going to hold it at an angle and partially ink up the bottom portion, and that'll just create a little gradation for the for the cornfield and just add some more depth. Now I'm moving on to the cornfield detail layer, and I'm going to ink this up in pumpkin pie once more and stamp it, and that will actually complete my scene. And I just love how the scene turned out. So much details and just really easy to stamp and put together. So I went ahead and stamped my field in the same combination of colors once more because I want to have two layers, or I want to layer that cornfield a little bit and to add some more depth. I'm now going to use the matching die that's included in the kit. Just line it up with the top of the cornfield and then use a couple pieces of tape to hold it in place and then run it through my die cutting machine. And as you can see here, it'll cut out the top of the cornfield and down the sides of the pumpkin field, but it won't cut the very bottom. So I'm just going to cut that off with my scissors, and I'll actually trim off that little remaining antique ivory later. And I did the same for the cornfield, the additional cornfield. Went ahead and lined that up with my die and ran it through my die cutting machine. Now I'm going to move on to creating a scarecrow. I have a scarecrow from the stamp set. I'm just going to ink it up first in Dandelion and stamp it onto a scrap of antique ivory, and now I'm going to Copic color this in. So this is a very tiny image, and I am going to do my best to color it in. I'm starting with the head. I'm going to create it like a pumpkin, and I just used an orange and colored it in. Try to avoid the eyes, nose, and mouth, but you don't have to worry about that because I will actually use a black marker and outline those or color those in with a black marker later. I used a darker orange to kind of shade, and then I used a red to add the grooves, the pumpkin grooves, on that face. So very tiny. You could avoid this if you don't want to color this. You could just stamp this in like black or really dark brown. I think that would look really good, and then die cut that if you want to avoid coloring it. But I do like coloring these images in because I think they just add a little bit more interest to the card, because this is going to be a pretty simple card. So I'm moving on to the straw. Just use a couple yellows for that. I also did the hat real quick with a couple of tans. Now moving on to his pants. I'm just going to use one brown here for the pants and just kind of do two layers to kind of add that shadow. Then I'll move on to the pole, or the wooden stock that he's on, or stake, I guess that's a stake. And then I'll finish up here with his shirt, and I have a couple kind of wine purpley colors picked out. I was trying to match the leaves that I stamped in raspberry jam. And I'll just use a couple of those colors to kind of create a little gradation, and that will actually complete my little scarecrow. So since I'm done coloring him, I went ahead and die cut him out with my matching die. And now I'm going to move on to creating my stormy sky. I have Fog Reactive ink here. This is a great ink for ink blending. All the reactive inks blend beautifully. They're a little bit creamier than dye inks, and I just love working with them for ink blending. I'm going to start with Fog here and just kind of ink blend out where I want the darkest areas of these stormy clouds to go. I am tapping off my ink pad or my ink blending tool every time I load it up with ink, tapping it onto the work surface to kind of get rid of that excess ink, and then approaching my paper. So that's an important, probably the most important thing about creating the stormy sky, is making sure you always tap off your excess before you approach or you touch your ink blending tool to your paper. I've moved onto a darker gray here. This is charcoal, and after I ink blended some of the clouds with that darker gray, I went back to Fog to again kind of blend that out and make everything a little bit softer. Charcoal is a dye ink, and the Fog again is that reactive ink, so it's a little bit creamier and helps to kind of smooth things out. Now I'm finishing up with INTENS-ified Black, which is also a great ink for ink blending, and just kind of making those darker areas even darker, and that will actually complete my stormy sky. It's actually pretty easy to create these stormy skies. The only thing, I think the only trick is to make sure you tap off your ink blending tool so you don't get too much ink on to your panels, and you take it slow. I'm going to stamp a sentiment and these birds, which are also from the Heroescape stamp set that's included in the kit. First I stamped it in raspberry jam, and then I moved on to the INTENS-ified Black. I did this 2-layer combo because I want those birds and sentiment to match that black area in the pumpkin field, and if you remember, we had to layer raspberry jam on top of the INTENS-ified Black, so it kind of affected the color a little bit. So by layering the inks once more for the sentiment and the birds, I'll get the same kind of hue. I'm now just going to finish up this card simply by adhering my my scenes, or my landscape scenes, to the front with some liquid glue. I started with the background layer cornfield. Now I'm going to add a little bit of glue to my scarecrow and stick him down, and then I'll finish by adding some liquid glue to the backside of my very front scene with my pumpkin field once I get that scarecrow in the right spot here. So just a little bit of glue and stick that down, and definitely the liquid glue is very handy here, so I can kind of slide these around until I get them in the right spot. And this is my finished card. I'll now hold my card up to the camera so you can get a good look at all the details in this card. That pumpkin patch and cornfield scene is gorgeous. I just love this new Heroescape stamp set. It's awesome. And I paired it with that stormy sky, which I think works really well with the sentiment that I chose for this card. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you'd like any more information on the products I use, please head over to Hero Arts. And thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.